Welcome to It's All About the Questions, where learning to ask the right questions can help you achieve lifelong success. Now, here to help you ask all the right questions is award-winning author, international speaker, and business strategist, Laura Stewart.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. Always a joy to be here every week, even with my handmade bangs that I did today. That first time I'm using my right hand, I don't recommend doing that yourself. But, we do what we have to in these times of change. And I'm so excited to be here with you because last week I missed the show. I was just not in a good place mentally, physically, or otherwise. My ear, my hand, everything. I think it just kind of hit me all at once. And I just went, I can't do this. And you know what? I missed it because seeing you guys every week and seeing what you put in the chats of the live stream of the show when we do it on the live stream portion before it goes out to podcast really lifts my spirits every week. So I'm not going to skip again because it ended up, I would have been better off just doing the show to make me feel better. But I thought it was important to share that with you, especially since our show today, we're going to be talking about digital well-being. And we're going to go a little bit deeper even than to just digital well-being. I cannot talk today. Okay, digital well-being. Now, my guest today is Dr. Heidi Forbes Oste. And Heidi, I don't know if I said that right. When I come back on, you're going to have to let me know. So I'm going to bring Heidi right on the show right now. Heidi and I, hey, Heidi. We also write for Podcast Magazine. And before I knew Heidi, I had reviewed her podcast, Evolving Digital Self, because she's in the tech realm of podcasts. And we all know I'm a geek. And that's what I do for Podcast Magazine is review those podcasts. And I so loved everything that Heidi was talking about that I was like, you have to come on the show. So Heidi, welcome. And please, did I slaughter your last name?
Thank you. No, it's totally fine. I'm very used to it. I get all forms of slaughter of the name. It's a Swedish name, so it just makes it complicated. It's Forbes Oste.
Oste, right? Okay, I was umlauting wrong.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Well, I want to thank you for being here today, and I know it's earlier for you because you are in Wyoming right now, right?
Yes.
And you've got a book called, you actually have two shows, Evolving Digital Self and Global Nomad Hacks, right? Which I love because you are totally a global nomad. Me, not so much. The last 3 years with my sound-induced vertigo, I've been stuck in my house. Like driving is even like a major torture fest to get in a car and go somewhere. But I used to love the whole idea of traveling everywhere. But the thing that saved me, Heidi, the last few years is the fact that technology was here, that I could close caption certain things because I couldn't listen. My phone was my lifeline because I could text people and I could email because I couldn't speak because my own voice would trigger me to have such extreme vertigo. I almost blacked out a couple of times. With that, I see all the time. I mean, you and I were talking before the show. It seems so obvious that we need to be talking about digital well-being, but yet every single day, Heidi, every single day, I talk to somebody and they're like, oh, no, I spend like 10 hours a day on my phone. I never go anywhere without it. I've got Messenger on. I've got notifications. I love it. I can't live without it. Yet they're like, I don't sleep. I'm totally stressed out. I feel like I don't achieve anything. So I feel like it's not obvious. And you're a behavioral scientist. This has to not be news to you.
Well, to start with, Laura, I'm so happy that you're able to use technology to really support your well-being, and particularly through the audio vertical. I've never heard of that before, but it sounds really torturous, particularly in a day when audio has become so critical as part of a communication factor for us. But there are so many great tools that we can use to compensate for that. My research really started because I started initially, we were living in Sweden and I had seasonal affective disorder, which put me in a very, very dark place. And I started using the technology to really pull myself out of that, and also to identify different ways that I could sort of hacks to improve my productivity when I was functional. And then, unfortunately, while I was doing my dissertation, it was sort of pronounced even more, even though the biggest hack was we moved to California in order to get more sun and light. But then I got Lyme disease. And so it was a whole different set of physical and psychological attributes that I had to counter and using technology. So the digital well-being for me goes far beyond just smartphone usage. It's really about how we can use technology to enhance our ability to be productive and human and engaged with the world. But finding a balance there where it doesn't become our world. And that's really that genuine sort of that tricky spot of balance is really what we're ultimately trying to achieve, where technology supports us rather than becomes us. And that's really, it's for some people, it's really a struggle. For others, it's sort of a natural thing. But I think for all of us, because the technology is constantly changing, it's a moving target. And so it's about building the awareness of how we engage with the technology.
Being a geek, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love technology, and I've spent, I don't know, over 3, close to 4, maybe 4 decades helping people implement technology at all levels, through personal all the way up to Fortune 50 companies. And I call myself in some cases a Luddite. Because I tend to, in my personal life, avoid a lot of technology. People are like, oh, you can do this, so you can do that. Don't you have that app? Why don't you use that? And I'm like, because I know for myself, when I fully immerse into tech, I don't feel as good physically. My posture changes. Even my eyes kind of change because of that, the distance and the blue lights and all the other stuff that's going on. But because I also feel that sometimes we lose a personal connection. We can get so lost. I mean, they call it doom scrolling now, where you're just constantly reading through the feed. But tech has some good benefits. And one of the things you talk about on your show, your one podcast, The Evolving Digital Self, and in your book, is this idea that technology should be created, and your consulting practice as well. Technology is created to assist us to live better lives. Yet I feel as if technology's gotten kind of subverted. Technology for the sake of technology, just because we can create it, just because it's there, it's sort of taken the place of it. What's your thoughts around that?
Well, I think there's sort of 2 important points there. And it's, I think, both from the user perspective and from the designer perspective, that we need to be careful about just because we can doesn't, and it's really just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And then the other piece is also recognizing that nowadays, or I think it's always been, but now we're able to recognize it better, that the anomaly is the norm. There's no one standard way. There's no one route to your relationship with technology. Each individual has different requirements, has different needs, has a different way of responding and reacting to the technology. So like you say, you're a Luddite, and yet what you're doing is actually practicing very conscious use of technology. You're aware of the fact that it affects you in a negative way. So these glasses I'm wearing, these Caddis, they're awesome. They're blue blockers. So they're both they're both a corrective lens for me, readers, but they're also a blue blocker lens, because exactly that. I spend a lot of time in front of a screen and it gives me headaches. It does all kinds of other things if I don't wear blue blockers. But wearing blue blockers, all of a sudden that eliminates one factor there where I'm still able to do that engagement. In terms of developing the technologies, absolutely. There is a lot of technology for technology's sake, but that's part of the development. We're in a rapidly evolving state where we are seeing things appear on the horizon that seem more like Star Wars or Star Trek experiences, and yet, or even the Jetsons, but they're getting integrated into the way that we engage. I mean, you think about this last year where everybody's been on Zoom or some other kind of tool like you're using right now with Restream, where we're able to basically engage with people across the globe. Sometimes it's synchronous, sometimes it's asynchronous, but it requires us engaging through a mediated tool. And for some people, that interaction can have different kinds of consequences. For some people, it's the first time that they've actually been able to engage with an international audience. For others, they really require that physical interaction or that genuine, synchronous response. So we all have different ways of engaging. We all have different ways of responding. But the technology, you've got to play with things first before they can actually get to a balanced space. So you're going to see a lot of technology for technology's sake, and some of it will go by the wayside, but other things will be integrated as we find their benefits. And so it's a challenging time because we have to be, as individuals, much more conscious about how those interactions with the technologies respond for us, both in terms of our productivity, but also in how they physiologically respond with our bodies. And most people aren't really aware of that. And sometimes I'm sitting here in my chair like this, okay? It's everything from your posture and the possibility to be aware of the fact I can see myself and I see that I have poor posture, or I can use a device that corrects my posture. There's another piece of technology. But there's, recognizing that there's certain things that enhance us, and there's other things that we have to create boundaries around. And that boundaries piece is what's critical. It's understanding what's good for us and what's not. And part of that is just in developing that relationship with the technology. It's kind of like having toxic friends. There's certain people that you spend time with, even though you know they're not good for you. Well, your relationship with technology can be that same way. So you've got to have really clear boundaries about what's good and what's not.
I feel like this last year accelerated a lot of these concepts that they were already moving forward. We were already seeing this move to work from anywhere. We were beginning to see at some level internet everywhere, right? Because this COVID time also showed us the lack of the same things, right? The people, friends of mine are like, oh, that's not true that people are sitting outside of a McDonald's, little kids trying to go to school because they don't have Wi-Fi at home. And I'm like, people, this is so true. I interviewed somebody who lives in Michigan. He runs, a pretty big company, but because of COVID, he wasn't going to the office. They had shut it down, but he had to go into his office to do the interview because where he lives, there's like no internet. And I said, it's not just in poor rural areas. I mean, this is a guy that was a half an hour outside of a major metropolitan center and he had no internet. So I feel like there's two aspects to this whole digital self. It's the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots, some of them really just don't care, but they now need to care because they can't go to school. They can't do a business because they can't get to the business where certain things were there, even doctors. I've had 3 doctors retire on me, which is not fun because one was my gynecologist.
Ooh.
And, it's not fun trying to find a new gynecologist, but he just never wanted to go digital. And with COVID, he said, it's just not worth it to me anymore because of what I need to do in order to do what I do. So he just retired, and several other doctors the same way. So with the work that you do with helping businesses, with helping individuals think through their strategies, I mean, what are some of the things that you look at in order to help people really begin to say technology for technology's sake isn't long-term feasible? Or if that's not an accurate statement, tell me it's not an accurate statement.
Well, I mean, I'm all for innovation, and I think innovation takes experimentation. So you need technology for technology's sake to be in that playground of development, but it needs to ultimately have a vision as to how it might be applied, how it could have an impact, but also recognizing sort of the ethical consequences of the development. But when you start putting restrictions on development and innovation in the beginning, you sort of limit that play space and the potential. So, for example, one of the things that I can't wait for, and I'm just a super geek about it, is holograms. I want to get to that place where I go to my Zoom meeting and I can see everybody sitting in the same room with me. Like, that would be so cool. And I mean, I have global teams and I want to be able to sit with them in the same room. I don't necessarily have to touch them, but I want to be able to see them and not be staring at a screen. Same thing with our phones. Now that we can actually do a lot of voice commands, to be able to take that movement of, keeping your head craned down, looking at a screen, and be able to just dictate things has been one of the most freeing things in the world for me. And I apologize, because I understand with your vertigo, that's probably the worst thing in the world, to have everything go audio. But it gives that accessibility piece to others that, I mean, I think about my 80-year-old mother. Same thing. She dictates everything. She dictates, and she uses the audio commands because the keyboard is so small, and it's, she doesn't have the dexterity that our kids have developed for using these devices. But in terms of the disparity, I think, unfortunately, the haves and have-nots piece, that's going to be there anyway. That's part of the innovation process. What we as developers and advisors can do is to really look at the big picture of, okay, in the initial phase, not everybody can have access, but how do we develop this so that ultimately the vision is accomplished, where the goal of whatever they're developing is accessible by all, or accessible by all who need it. And I think, looking at where we are in Wyoming, for example, there's certain areas, certain pockets here that there's just no access. I mean, you look at some of the reservations and they have, very minimal access. And yet, there are organizations that are coming together to provide the tools, to provide the connectivity. It's not perfect by a long shot, but it's an effort to ultimately reach the longer term goal. And there's going to be that intermediate phase where, that technology is moving faster than the distribution of the technology. But in that process, some of that technology will disappear because it's not going to be relevant. It's not going to be, it's not helpful. I mean, you look at, it's sort of that first world problem. You have all these people that are over-connected and it's killing them, right? So is it necessary to give that same level of connectivity to the entire world? Maybe not. Maybe that's actually more of a problem. So, I mean, I can't really, I don't dare say sort of, yes, we should all have this, or no, we shouldn't, no one should have that. But what I'm saying is that if we limit the innovation by saying, oh, well, everybody has to have access to this right away, then we don't get the innovation that's necessary to get to our ultimate vision of, having access to education, having access to healthcare, having access to all of these things that we all need universally. And does everybody need a smartphone? Well, 20 years from now, pretty much. But if you're living in a rural farm area somewhere that, that you're not, that, you don't have a bus system that you need to use your phone for a ticket, and your life sort of boundaries, or your life bubble, if you will, is
Right.
much smaller. Maybe that's, your requirements for what you need in order to find happiness and health and education is not requiring the highest level of technology, but maybe being able to get access to it on a laptop at home that can give you the digital reports of what's going on with the weather and what's going on with, the the environment. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a perfect answer for you, Laura. All I can say is that, there is no perfect answer for everyone. Everyone has different requirements, and there's always going to be disparities. But the best that we can do is to develop with vision and ethics so that we understand the potential for things, and that we intend to be able to make whatever is needed for the future accessible to whoever needs it.
I love the way you put that. That is really beautiful. That, it becomes accessible to whoever needs it for whatever they need it for. I just finished watching the latest season of Star Trek Discovery. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't seen it yet. No.
Okay. It's a radically different show from Star Trek as we've known it, either the original Star Trek or Star Trek Next Generation or Voyager or Deep Space Nine, total Star Trek geek. And in it, they end up having, in the third season of it, in order to save the world from all sentient life, very HAL 9000, in order to save the world from destruction of sentient life by an AI, they jump 930 some odd years to the future. And here's this starship and all the people, and they jump through time. And of course, it's like radically different than what they thought it was going to be, but they're still people. So obviously they succeeded. Well, once they finally find the Federation and they get back out there and connected with them, and the starship gets retrofitted with all the latest new tech. Well, all of a sudden, it's personal transporters. Their badge allows them to instantly transport themselves wherever they want to go. But there's also this other device that sort of gets put on them that allows them to have, like, we have an iPad, right? And all the Star Trek universes, they always had the pads that they signed or watched or did, right? Well, all of a sudden they just go like this with their hand and it appears in front of them, and they can move things around with their hands and they can read. And then this other hand, they can manifest phasers and laser cutters, and it's all just there. Like, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had that technology? But at the same time, when they lose access to it, the Discovery crew can still function, right? Because they haven't had it for very long, which makes them superheroes to the future world because they know a life without it. I feel like we have a potential to lose that connection to the world and the troubleshooting and that critical thinking processes that we've begun to push off to other things. Let me give an example. My friends all have kids. I've never had kids, but they're trying to figure out how to help their kids in school. Growing up, I know how much the teachers did for us. But nowadays, people have really pushed everything to the teachers to do. Right? My parents helped a lot. They came into the classrooms and were teachers' aides and monitors. But now all of a sudden it's all on the families at home. And it's all digital. And these kids are struggling because nobody realized how much interaction was really needed to keep the kids focused. So where does that for you factor into this? I don't know if it was really clear because I'm trying to formulate this whole idea of we need to use the technology, but I'm afraid that we may be raising a generation that doesn't know how to think without it because the computer makes the leaps for them.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And in my second book, or actually technically it was my third book, but Digital Self-Mastery Across Generations, I looked a lot at this, and this was I wrote it pre-COVID. But one of the things that I found that was really interesting while I was doing my research is that, so I'm Gen X, I have Gen Z kids, and my mother's
Boomer.
Yeah, exactly. Boomer.
I'm a
She's
boomer.
sort of lost generation, boomer, or whatever,
Yeah.
great generation. But what I found was really fascinating was this agility that the kids have that we don't give them enough credit for. I think the ones that struggle a bit are, Gen X. We both have our feet both in the technology and in the sort of manual manipulation way of doing things. And we try to do both at the same time and get overwhelmed. Whereas the Gen Z are extremely agile in how they integrate the technology. And they're much better at turning it off than I think Gen Xers they're very good at the doom scroll. They get caught in that. And because it's sort of, it's this, it's like reading the newspaper, but it never ends, right? So when you sit down for your Sunday newspaper, you can just keep on going. Whereas it used to have a
call it going
finite,
down the rabbit hole.
yeah, exactly. It used to have a finite end, though. You finish the paper and then you put it aside and then you go do your Sunday activity. Now it's like, I can dig deeper and you go down the rabbit hole. I do find that, having Gen Z kids myself, my husband and I were always having conversations like they don't even know how to chop wood. They don't, we need to teach them some of these basic skills, survival skills, that, what if everything does get shut off, but I think that one of the things that has really come out, both positive and negative from this last year is the resilience in these kids. I think it's hard that we have to recognize that this is hard for everyone. We are in the middle of a pandemic. So you can't expect perfect solutions when it's something that got thrown on everyone. I mean, even the companies that are creating the solutions that are helping us through it, whether it's the Zooms or the, whatever, they weren't prepared for the scale of what was needed. And so, and the internet service providers, to be able to increase the demand and increase the connectivity, the cellular providers, all of this, it's put challenges on everyone. So we can't expect, yes, we've been into it a year, but if you look at the grand scheme of things, a year is not a very long time in terms of development. And yes, technology goes very fast, but you have to have that experimentation time. And we're sort of all caught in this big experiment. So, I think we have to practice patience a little bit more. Now, that's not to say that it's not a struggle. I'm not trying to discount that. I think, what we're seeing is something that is going to have very serious consequences down the line. But it also is going to develop, you look at these kids, they're coming out of, or they're going into high school, they're going into their schools, and they're the whole environment that they're coming out of when they finish is changing. The landscape is changing. But in a way, they're at an advantage because they're at that flexion point where they're deciding what they want to do with their lives. And they're deciding based on this new landscape. Whereas these kids that graduated 4 years ago, they've got degrees that are completely obsolete.
Right.
So there's, and they may not even be as, if they finished college, before this whole thing, they may not also be comfortable. At least the kids that are in school right now, they're learning how to use the tools. That's because it's part of the requirement of just getting their education. So there's an upside and a downside to all of it. And I think we need to be a little bit more patient and kind with ourselves and our learning and the learning process, and forgiving on sort of looking at the bigger picture, because yes, we're still in the middle of this pandemic struggle, but in the end, we're learning these critical skills, and we're learning what our strengths and weaknesses are within that learning process, that are going to help us and help our kids going forward. So I have when you're looking at it in the short term, I think it can be very easy to be very negative about it. But I think when we're, in the research that I'm doing for my new book on the future of workplace, I think all of this stuff is really helpful for preparing them for the future and preparing them for what the workplace and what the world is like 20 years from now, which is going to be when they're the adults. So I think, yes, it's hard, but it's not easy for anyone. I mean, there's some people that have been like, oh, the pandemic's been great. I'm an introvert. I love being inside. I love being able to pick and choose who I interact with, and I don't have to go to these big conferences. And then but there's still challenges,
Yeah.
So there's others that are like desperate for that human contact, and they need that feedback.
Yeah. I miss hugs.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
I'm a huge hugger.
Yeah, my mother. We have this expression that we created this summer called a Gram witch. My mother goes by the nickname Gram. And my husband and I drove across the country during like the peak of the pandemic to help her move out of her home into a senior community. And she had been in isolation basically for 6 months. So we had to wait sort of our quarantine time and then go get our negative test. She got her negative test. And then we were able to give her a hug. So my husband and I give her a hug on both sides. And it was the most amazing thing. It was like this desperation of like, that was the first physical contact she'd had in 6 months. And so she got lots of Gramwiches after that. And now she's vaccinated. So she's been able to get more Gramwiches from my brother and sister-in-law who live a little more locally to her. But it's that physical contact. And I think part of what we're recognizing in this time is what's important to us. So yes, there are struggles, but this time has been really an incredible opportunity for us to recognize what and who is important to us and to really skim off the stuff that's not.
Michelle Ragusa McBain, an incredible friend of mine, has just posted a couple of things. She misses hugs too. And her husband, Jay, he's one of the top futurists in the world around technology. If you do not know him, I need to introduce you to him and Michelle because they're just awesome.
I'd love to have them on my show.
Oh my God, they're just awesome. Because Michelle posted and what you were just talking about, it really got me thinking about a completely different tangent of where I was planning on going. Have you seen a change in, let's say, culture? Okay. I remember grammar school and middle school and high school. And, even in business environments, I have a friend who has to change jobs because she was put underneath somebody else who is a passive aggressive bully. And the woman is the head of HR. So how do you prove any of it? Because these people are so good at being so subtle about things, right? In schools, there's cliques, right? In businesses, there are cliques. With this switch to digital, we know we have cyber bullies and all of that, but with schools going online, these bullies, these people that perhaps were leaders in a good way and leaders in a bad way, don't have that same physical presence to impact things. Do you think that when we go back to some form of more human contact, that those people will still be able to go back to their, let's call them bad behaviors, because they are. Bullying is totally bad behavior.
Mhm.
And there's all different levels of that. You know, we see the movies, they talk about putting kids in lockers, but do you think that that's still going to continue because of this digital push when we go back? I mean, I'm curious. I don't even know how to ask the right question, but when I think through this, I go, we've had a year of where some people, some kids and some businesses, it's like, oh my God, it's so much better. There's so much less drama from those worlds that have entered into our own worlds. What happens when you go back?
Well, I think there's a couple things to take into account. You know, human nature is human nature. You're not going to change a whole lot there. But what you are going to, what's been an amazing thing that we've really seen a lot of, when everything goes digital, there's accountability. Everything from, you know, cryptocurrencies down to what we're seeing with the engagement in a classroom. You know, you can't chat and say something mean without everybody seeing it, and without somebody being able to do a screen capture and say, look, this is what he said to me. This is not, this is not nice. So there's that accountability piece. But one thing that we're also seeing, and we saw this back when I was working in education technology in the early 90s, where it was just in forums and everything. But all of a sudden, when we did the virtual high school, and people were actually able to take had access to courses that they would never have had access to. But they also, what we found was, this is where sort of the geeks became the stars. They were the ones that sat in the corner and never said anything in the physical classroom. But when they were given a virtual voice, where they all of a sudden were able to share their knowledge, maybe step back for a moment and actually, share what was of value to the conversation, it just became this incredible opportunity for the introvert, for that quiet person who has an incredible value to the conversation, but never spoke up before. And the one that it's no longer that one that has the loudest voice or the prettiest face or whatever it is that got the most attention. I think we will see some of that shift coming back, because those people have recognized their own value and their peers have recognized their value in the conversation. But human nature is human nature. You're not going to change a bully overnight, but you can hold them accountable. And I think what we're going to see going forward is the reality of it is we're never going to go back to the way it was. It's not about like going back. What we will see in the future, pretty much guaranteed, is a hybrid environment. And that's why I was talking about earlier, the whole mesh concept, like we're seeing from IBM, the holograms and whatever. We're going to see a lot more of this hybrid, where you get both the physical and the virtual combined. And that really gives everybody a chance to shine, but it also holds people accountable. So hopefully, despite human behavior, despite our own weaknesses, we will be able to interact and hopefully be a little more kind.
I love that, because I feel like there's so much good that has happened. And people keep saying, when are we going to go back? And I'm like, I don't want to go back.
No.
Yes, there are parts about the 1950s and 60s and 70s as a child growing up that I truly loved. But I don't want to go back there, because there's so much more wonder and accessibility that has happened. I would love to go back to some of the respect and kindness things that were just automatically assumed would happen. Calling your adult neighbor Mr. or Mrs., just as a respect, until they said, oh no, you can call me Heidi or whatever it is. I think those certain things, etiquette, whatever you want to call them, I feel like we've lost a bunch of that, because we've all gotten so just comfortable. And I don't necessarily feel that somebody, just because of their position, should automatically get respect, but I feel like they should at first, and then they have to prove that they deserve that over time. So looking forward to what is going to come from COVID, the fact that people are helping people. Businesses are changing. Jay McBain has talked about this a number of times. Daniel Burrus is another friend of mine. He's a big futurist as well. I don't know if you know Daniel and the Anticipatory Organization, but one of the things that they both talk about is this idea that moving forward, we need to take the best of what was before, move it with us, let go what was not the best. And I feel like people are kind of forgetting that conversation. We're in a time of massive abundance for a large portion of the world, but large, not so good stuff for another part. So how do we bring them forward? It's not a matter of making everybody equal, but giving everybody opportunities. I feel COVID has transformed the business landscape. I mean, businesses that were able to pivot. I watch Shark Tank, and you see these businesses that there were all in-person businesses, and now their business is taken off because they've figured out how to take advantage of digital. So with your thinking, your behavioral science background, your tech background, I mean, if I remember correctly, your husband, Bjorn, is he one of the co-founders of Oatly?
Yes.
Okay. Which I've not tried yet, but I just saw they have a chocolate version. So I'm really
good.
Chocolate
Try it warm if you like hot chocolate.
Okay. I'm going to have to go get that now. But, we're seeing how, because of supply chain issues, because of technology, we've been able to look at the world in another way. Do you think that will survive the same way, or is it, I know it's going to escalate even further, but this idea of people want to just forget everything that happened, or they want to go back to where the way it was. To me, there's no more new normal. This is just normal. Each day is what normal is.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are in this. I generally try to refer to it as like a chrysalis. It's basically, we're in this phase where, like you said, things weren't so great right before this happened, right? And don't necessarily want to go back to it. But in order for major change to happen, a lot of systems have to be broken down and completely recreated. And I think we're still very much in the chrysalis, where little things are starting to poke out, but we are still very much in the middle of this chrysalis where a lot of systems still need to be broken down. And yet what we're seeing a lot more of is social businesses, social enterprises. I mean, if you look at 15 years ago, if you wanted to start a social enterprise, they were like, okay, you're either a nonprofit or you're a business. You can't have a purpose, and we're not going to invest in you if you just are purpose-based. Now, employees, everyone, the market is demanding that you have a purpose. They're demanding that you have a social impact. So I think we are seeing this shift, and I think COVID has been helpful in that, because there's more need, or it's been more visible also because it's been more, it's really come to the surface. And so you can't deny it anymore. It's, whether it's climate or whether it's poverty or whether it's, whatever it is, you can't ignore it. It's right there in your face. And I think that this next generation is very much about, what do we need to do to create that shift? Now, circling back a little bit to what you were saying in terms of, some of those things that, that we were raised with, sort of the kindness and respect. I think those things are sort of inherent in that as well, but they are learned. They're something that we learned within the culture of our families. We learned within the culture of the institutions. And it's up to the leaders, whether you're a leader in a family or an institution, to really define that culture. And so it's having a culture of gratitude and appreciation and really integrating that. I mean, in my research around digital self, one of the things that I talk about a lot is the importance of gratitude, and that gratitude. So you don't really think about like gratitude and technology. Where do those two things fit in? But when you're, it's everything from being grateful of the fact that having a smartphone gives you access to your community, your people, your information, that you all of a sudden don't have to carry around this big bag with a, Rolodex or not a Rolodex, a Filofax, and remember those, or even Palm Pilot, all of these crazy things, all of these things that we had before that, that took up a lot of space. I mean, they weren't great, but it's all just part of the evolution of where we're going. And having a sense of gratitude for what those things provide and the people that are in that make those things happen, and the people that are on the other side, that we're able to connect with. The fact that we have a tool like LinkedIn that enables us to connect with our entire network. Forget that Filofax, forget the Rolodex. All of a sudden, we can keep it up to date. We know where people are, we know where they're working, and we can reach out to them by putting in a simple filter and say, who do I know that works in this space? That we can get information and entertainment by just logging on to Apple Podcasts. And all of a sudden, we have access to all of these great stories, knowledge. I mean, the access to information is incredible. But if you don't have that sense of gratitude, which is something that is built in culturally, then it's very easy to just take it all for granted and just, run right through it. And I think, so that's where the culture piece is absolutely critical, but it comes from the foundation of who our leaders are. And so I think that's something that unfortunately is up to human nature, and it's something we all need to work on, and we need to work on individually, and we need to work on as parents and as community leaders, and and as leaders of organizations, leaders of podcasts, to talk about gratitude, appreciation, to just recognize how important that is as we move forward, if we are going to survive as humanity, and to take care of each other. I mean, like Michelle was saying, we're all in this together, humanity. Right. And that's not just us in our little bubble, but the bigger picture of the whole globe. So,
I mean,
long answer to a short question. Sorry.
I interviewed Mark Asquith the other week, the British podcast guy, and he's created all these different platforms. And he said something similar to you, long answer to a short question. And I'm like, yeah, no, you went where I wanted you to go. My role as the interviewer is to set up a thought and see where you go with those thoughts. It's not about you, at least on my show, it's not, Heidi. It's not about me asking you a question, getting an answer, ask a question, get an answer. My goal here is to start a conversation, to spur those thoughts and let you go where they go, because this show is all about shifting perspectives. And I love it. So it was absolutely perfect. I had a feeling that that's kind of where you might go with it. But I didn't care. I just wanted to hear that thought. So yay, perfect. Thank you very much. You talked about leaders and where leaders need to go. And okay, we're both sitting here in the United States. To me, it's not about politics, although I have my feelings about politics. You probably have your own. I look at other countries over the last year and the last 4 years, okay, and how their leaders used technology and social platforms to lift up their people and their countries, and how other leaders in certain other places used it to create division. As a world, do you think it's possible to still have freedom of speech and, lay out your thoughts, whatever they may be, on social without having that, let's call it 1950s idea of don't say it if it's going to hurt somebody, unless it's going to be a productive moving forward, constructive criticism versus
Yeah.
negative feedback kind of thing. And I feel like it's become a world where you can say stuff just because you can say stuff, and nobody's ever going to see you, because that social media platform might not even really be you. It could be a name, a person, whatever you've made up for it. But yet the leaders of the world, they're not trying to hide. But I think their role, as you said, we need to lift, right? We need to move the world forward in some way and say, this is how we should treat each other. But yet not everybody feels that way. I mean, we can go back in time. Genghis Khan, can you imagine if he had social media? Hitler, if he had social media. And, the list can go on and on and on about, if the Unabomber, if any of these things progressed to a certain level. What's your conversation around that, Heidi? Because it's something that really concerns me. And because you're a behavioral scientist, I think you're the perfect person for me to finally ask that question of.
Well, I'm not necessarily sure if I have a full answer for you, but what I can say, and then this is part of the reason, actually, that interesting, well placed, Laura, is in why I started Global Nomad Hacks. So Global Nomad Hacks wasn't necessarily just about like how to be a digital nomad or all of those things, which I think a lot of people, there's a lot of conversation around that. But really, it was about how to be a good global citizen. If you're going to be traveling around the world or living as an expat or engaging in global forums and or raising kids that are, bicultural, that are, binational, or living in what's referred to as a third culture kid. You've got parents from two different countries, but you're living in another country and you're raising your kids there. These are great opportunities for us to be good global citizens and to learn how to respect and be kind and to communicate in a way that is authentic and clear and respectful. And so it's really, to me, it was about having those conversations about what it means to be a good global citizen, what it means to use the tools that we have, the platforms that we have accessible to us to make the world a better place, to contribute to humanity. And so it's really, I think, yes, of course, there's always going to be, like the bullies, there's always going to be those bad guys. But what we can do as general parts of humanity when we see those is to speak out and to say, that's not okay, and to hold those people accountable for what they're doing. And if enough people speak out and we make sure that we track things so that we can, make good decisions and to really be able to evaluate, whether it's as a scientist looking at things and making sure that the facts are being presented properly, and not just in science, but in politics and in everything else. The information is out there, the data is out there, and to help people recognize, what's truth and what's not truth, to help people recognize what's good and what's evil. And I think that that's the best that we can do as humans. There's always going to be bad people. There's always going to be, I hesitate to say evil. But what we can do is at least have a conversation about it and to help people understand how to view things critically and to have a critical lens. But, that's something that's a learned skill. You don't come out of the womb having critical thinking, and some people never learn it. So it's part of really developing as humans. And when we can have a global perspective, it helps us actually create that critical lens. I mean, in all the years that I've lived abroad, I feel like I was like a more patriotic American than ever, but at the same time, I had a critical lens of it, and that there were things about America that I was disappointed in, and there were other things that I was so proud and excited about. And the same thing for my Swedish husband. I mean, rarely celebrated midsummer when we lived in Sweden. But then when we come back, and lived in the US or anywhere else, we had to have a big midsummer celebration because it was about pulling all of our community together and celebrating the earth and celebrating the changing of the seasons. So I think, the more that we can take ourselves out of our comfort zone and look back in and recognize what's going on, both good and bad, the better humanity will be. So whether as leaders we help people get into that space so that they can get perspective, or whether we just share the perspective, we have to be totally clear and authentic with where we are coming from, so that our perspective say like, okay, this is my viewpoint but this is based on what my experience is. I don't know the absolute. There's always, difference of opinion, but I can give you the data and I can tell you, what my perspective is based on that data. And as long as we start from that point, we can hopefully have more honest and clear conversations and appreciate, what we have.
You just gave the perfect place to close up the show for today. I mean, that was just so beautiful, Heidi. I want to make sure that everybody knows how to reach out to you, how to listen to your podcasts and get your books, or just reach out to you if they have further questions. Sure.
So sort of the bucket place to reach me would be To Balance You is my company. And there's access to both the podcasts, Evolving Digital Self and Global Nomad Hacks. We're also on all different podcatchers, so easy to find there. We actually just launched a really exciting space, which is going to be growing very fast, which is under globalnomadhacks.com/hacks, where we're putting all of the great discoveries that we've found along the way of, the tools that we use and the, service providers that have done really cool things and the people that we've interviewed. So it's actually a really fun space to really, to highlight some of the people that are doing it right and some of the cool things that you can find that help us be more human in a very technological world. So, that's sort of the easiest way to find me. And there's contact forms on all of those. If you have any questions, happy to reach out. Okay.
And it's the number 2, balance, the letter U.com, and globalnomadhacks.com.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Heidi. I mean, it was just a fantastic conversation. And I know I could have talked to you for another hour easily, just going about all these different conversations, going deeper dive into some of the global nomad stuff as well. You've been just a joy to have on the show.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's been a pleasure to be here with you.
All right. And everybody, I love the fact that Heidi has some really unique perspectives, and she ties them so critically to the world today, the world yesterday, and the world in the future. That's called critical thinking. And I would love to know what you all think about the conversation that Heidi and I had today. How is it affecting your life, this change? How is your life being altered by the new digital landscape? Forget the word new. How is it being altered by the digital landscape? What are the pluses for you? What are the negatives? Are you even thinking about that? Share, post this out wherever your friends are. Tell your fans about it. Anybody that you think could benefit from this conversation that Heidi and I had today. And of course, as always, I would love it if you would, on your favorite podcast platform, rate and review the show, because it does help us get found. Remember, everybody, at the end of the day, the right questions can change your life. So what are you asking today? Have a great day, everyone.
You've been listening to It's All About the Questions, starring Laura Stewart. Connect with Laura at it'sallaboutthequestions.com and download a free workbook that will help you ask better questions starting today.